Hey guys, tonight we slip quietly into the smoky half-light of the 6th century, when candles flicker in drafty stone halls, when the scent of spiced wine mingles with the musk of damp firs, and when kingdoms are as fragile as the people trying to hold them together. You're stepping into Neustria, one of the early Frankish realms, where betrayal is a pastime, family feuds shape borders, and queens are often remembered less for mercy than for the gossip that clung to them. And tonight, you meet Fredegund, the queen who climbed from the bottom rungs of society all the way to a scandal-soaked throne. Spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this climb yourself, unless you happen to be a master of poison. Pillow talk, and palace politics, so, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing this community span from midnight owls in Los Angeles to early risers in Hanoi. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge through the wet fields of Gaul, mud tugging at your sandals. The year is somewhere around 545, and Rome's grand shadow has faded. What stands in its place is the Merovingian dynasty, a family tree that looks more like a briar patch of half-brothers. Rival wives, and suspicious deaths. The Frankish kings rule over territories called Neustria and Austrasia, kingdoms that sound grand but are constantly breaking apart and being patched back together like a medieval hand-me-down cloak. In the middle of this chaos, a girl is born, Fredegund. Unlike the noble children whose birth is recorded with scribes and feasts, hers passes quietly. Historians argue whether she was born enslaved or simply the daughter of commoners, but what they agree on is this: she had no claim to power, no golden cradle, no shield of bloodline. Just sharp instincts and a survival streak that would put modern reality show contestants to shame. You picture her childhood in some damp, smoky hut on the edge of Frankish lands. The smell of smoke never leaves her clothes. She hears whispers of kings who ride with glittering helmets, queens who wear robes dyed in Tyrian purple, and battles where warriors return with sacks of Roman coins. For a girl like her, the palace is another planet, but somehow, she gets there, the quirky tidbit. Many later chroniclers insisted she began her palace life as a laundress, scrubbing sweat-stained tunics and rinsing cloaks in cold river water. Imagine folding the king's underwear one day and plotting to wear his crown the next. That's the kind of career advancement that doesn't come with a LinkedIn profile, but it does leave an impression. As you shuffle down the palace corridors with her, you notice how much power hums in the air. Servants keep their heads bowed, nobles bicker over who gets closer to the king, and alliances shift like the flicker of a candle flame. A maid who listens carefully could gather more intelligence than a general on the battlefield. And Fredegund listens. The Frankish court is ruled by King Chilperic I of Neustria, a man ambitious enough to marry for politics but foolish enough to fall for a clever smile. He's one of the many sons of Clotaire I, whose death split the Frankish lands like a cake at a family reunion. Except everyone brought daggers instead of forks. Rival brothers constantly test each other's borders, while queens are caught in a web of marriages meant to cement alliances. Fredegund watches. She learns how to speak softly, how to flatter, how to make herself useful. It's said she was strikingly beautiful, with sharp features and piercing eyes, but beauty alone didn't buy her survival, it was her timing. When others hesitated, she acted. When others obeyed, she schemed. You lean against the palace wall and notice her gazing toward the throne, not in awe, but in calculation. That look, the mixture of hunger and patience, would one day make chroniclers compare her to a wolf pacing the edge of a village. Historians still argue whether she was driven by ambition, by desperation, or by sheer instinct to rise above the station she was born into. Maybe it was all three. At this stage, though, she's just a servant, blending into the background. She fetches water, she smooths linens, she pours wine. But every gesture, every bow, every moment of silence, those are rehearsals for the role she'll soon seize. Picture the crackle of a hearth fire, the murmur of courtiers boasting about their hunts. And in the corner, Fredegund, quietly watching, ears open. She knows one thing: in a kingdom where brothers kill brothers, queens fall by poison, and alliances crumble overnight, the only way to survive is to never stay in the shadows for too long. You slip deeper into your blanket, hearing the faint echo of clinking goblets and the scrape of boots on stone floors. Somewhere in that hum of ambition, a maid with no title begins her ascent. And though no one knows it yet, she will outlast kings, terrify rivals, and inspire centuries of scandalous whispers. Her gilded cradle may be a myth, her birth a mystery, but her presence will soon fill chronicles, sermons, and the darkest corners of rumor alike. The little servant girl from Neustria has just stepped into history's line of sight, and history, messy, bloody, and scandalous, is about to take notice. You wander deeper into the candlelit palace halls, and there she is again, Fredegund, no longer just a maid carrying pitchers of water, but something sharper, something hungrier. She's moving up, step by calculated step, in the household of King Chilperic. I imagine watching a game of medieval chess where pawns somehow learn how to move like queens. That's Fredegund in action. The Frankish kings weren't exactly paragons of morality. Chilperic himself was nicknamed the Nero and Herod of his time by Gregory of Tours, a biting insult suggesting he was cruel, lustful, and greedy. This was a man who had multiple wives, numerous mistresses, and a general inability to resist new temptations. Into this swirl of lust and politics steps Fredegund, who, depending on which chronicler you believe, either bewitched him with her beauty or calculated every glance until he was hooked. Historians still argue whether she began as his servant who simply caught his eye, or if she maneuvered herself into the role of mistress by systematically removing rivals. What we do know is that she made the leap from pouring the king's wine to warming his bed. And in the rigid social ladder of the 6th century, that leap is the equivalent of climbing from unpaid intern to CEO's spouse without stopping at any middle rung. You picture the shift in her daily life. Gone are the cold riverbanks where she once scrubbed laundry. Now, she lounges on cushions, hair braided with bits of gold, whispering advice into the king's ear. She's not yet queen, but she's already more powerful than most nobles who spend years angling for influence. There's a quirky tidbit hidden in the chronicles. Fredegund supposedly had a knack for luxurious gifts, especially fine fabrics. She is said to have introduced Chilperic to new fashions, draping him in silks that were likely imported along ancient trade routes. You can almost imagine courtiers whispering, "The king looks different these days," while Fredegund smiles quietly, aware she's reshaping his image stitch by stitch. Of course, her rise didn't please everyone. Queens at the time were not just decorative, they were political assets. Marriages tied together kingdoms, secured alliances, and legitimized heirs. Concubines, by contrast, were supposed to remain disposable distractions. But Fredegund, with her blend of beauty, wit, and icy resolve, was proving she wasn't disposable at all. Now, here's where the palace air thickens. Chilperic's official wife was Audavra, a noblewoman who had already given him children, including several sons. Yet, Fredegund's presence began to overshadow her. Whispers swirled through the corridors, "The king favors the maid." Imagine being Audavra, forced to watch a servant slowly eclipse you in both bed and politics. Not exactly the cozy family drama you'd want to livestream. As the months pass, you sense Audavra's isolation. Her position weakens every time Fredegund is spotted draped in jewels, laughing beside the king at feasts. Some courtiers, loyal to the old queen, grit their teeth and mutter prayers. Others, more pragmatic, begin bowing to the rising star instead. In courts like these, loyalty is often a rented costume, easy to change, easy to discard. Chilperic, always impulsive, encourages the rivalry. He seems to delight in watching two women maneuver for his attention, not realizing, or perhaps not caring, that he's fueling a storm. For Fredegund, it's perfect. She thrives in chaos, sliding into the cracks that open whenever Chilperic makes a reckless move. Historians still argue whether her love for Chilperic was genuine passion or pure ambition. Some chronicles describe her as fiercely devoted, a woman who fought for her king against overwhelming odds. Others paint her as a manipulative siren, using affection as her deadliest weapon. The truth probably lies somewhere between, a relationship built on both desire and the intoxicating promise of power. You slip past the great hall one evening, the smell of roasted meat heavy in the air, and you catch the sight of Chilperic, drunk on wine, laughing as Fredegund whispers something into his ear. He nods. The courtiers glance nervously at each other, aware that whatever she said could shape tomorrow's fate for half the kingdom. It's not just a pillow talk affair anymore, it's politics wrapped in silk sheets. The danger, though, is that she hasn't yet secured her crown. She's vulnerable, balanced precariously between mistress and queen. One wrong step, one unlucky pregnancy from Adavra, one rival who whispers too loudly, and she could tumble back down into obscurity, or worse. But Fredegund doesn't stumble. She studies, she listens, she waits. And when her moment comes, she'll seize it with claws sharpened by years of watching from the shadows. For now, you breathe in the heavy perfume of the court and watch as a servant-turned-mistress tightens her grip on the king's heart. The world outside the palace may be fields and mud. But here, in this chamber of ambition and betrayal, Fredegund is learning the most important lesson of all, that proximity to power is only the first step. To hold on to it, you have to be willing to do anything. You stretch your legs beneath the long wooden table of Chilperic's great hall, hearing the echo of boots and the rustle of embroidered cloaks. The court is buzzing with rumors again, rumors that grow teeth and claws, gnawing at reputations until someone finally bleeds. And tonight, the whispers circle around a new queen. Because Fredegund, no longer content with being the king's mistress, has just maneuvered herself into the position of wife. Not by luck. Not by a fairy tale wedding. But by ruthlessly clearing the path. The official queen now standing in her way is Galswintha, a Visigothic princess from Spain. Her marriage to Chilperic was supposed to be a masterstroke of diplomacy. She brought prestige, foreign ties, and the kind of noble blood that made alliances stick. Yet what she didn't bring was her husband's affection. Chilperic quickly grew cold toward her, drawn again and again to the charms of Fredegund, who lingered like smoke in his chambers. You lean closer, and the drama is unbearable. Galswintha, humiliated by the king's open devotion to another woman, threatens to return to Spain. She longs for her homeland, away from these cold northern courts where betrayal is thicker than the morning fog. The chroniclers paint her as a tragic figure, a young woman trapped in a loveless marriage, overshadowed by a mistress who refuses to fade into the background. And then, one morning, Galswintha is dead. Strangled in her bed. No trial, no investigation, just a sudden silence where once there had been protest. Historians still argue whether Chilperic himself ordered the killing, or whether Fredegund, impatient to seize her prize, arranged it on her own. Some even speculate it was a joint effort, a pillow talk decision sealed with a fatal act. What we do know is that her death was convenient for the king who wanted to be rid of her, and even more convenient for the mistress who wanted her crown. The quirky tidbit here. Chroniclers note that Galswintha's dowry was massive, towns, lands, and wealth stretching across Gaul. When she died, Chilperic simply kept them. You can almost hear the scandalized gasp of her Visigothic family, realizing their princess had been traded like a pawn and then discarded like yesterday's bread. For Fredegund, though, this is the breakthrough. Within days, not months, Chilperic marries her. No waiting period, no mourning, no pretense of grief. The maid-turned-mistress now wears a queen's diadem. And the court? Well, the courtiers bow, as they always do, because survival depends on bowing to whoever sits on the throne, no matter how she got there. But that hasty wedding plants seeds of vengeance that will grow into a blood-soaked feud. Galswintha's sister, Brunhilda, married to Chilperic's brother Sigebert, will never forgive the insult. To her, Fredegund isn't just a rival queen. She's a murderer. And that grudge will ignite decades of war between the two women, wars fought not only with swords but with assassins, bribes, and relentless propaganda. You glance at Fredegund now, draped in silks and seated beside the king. She knows eyes are on her, judging, muttering about how she won her place. But does she care? Not likely. In this age, survival is power, and power has no patience for squeamish morality. Still, even queens have to play their roles. She commissions churches, makes donations, and occasionally presents herself as a pious, dutiful wife. Yet the illusion is thin. Everyone in Neustria knows how she got there, and everyone wonders who might be next on her list. Historians still debate her motives. Was she driven purely by ambition, determined to claw her way up from nothing? Or was she sincerely loyal to Chilperic, convinced she was the better partner for ruling Neustria? Maybe she even saw herself as chosen, destined to rise from obscurity to the throne, a medieval Cinderella whose slipper just happened to be laced with poison. The courtiers whisper one more detail: Fredegund doesn't just bask in the king's favor, she influences it. She offers counsel, tempers his rage, or sometimes fans it to achieve her ends. A servant may have been expected to remain invisible, but a queen can shape policy with a single word, especially when her husband is more impulsive than strategic. You hear the faint creak of the throne as she shifts beside Chilperic, her eyes scanning the hall. You can almost sense the calculation behind her gaze, as if she's already listing potential rivals and deciding which ones might need to disappear. It's not paranoia, it's survival. Because in a kingdom where queens can be strangled in their beds, Fredegund knows her crown is as fragile as glass. Outside the palace, peasants trudge through muddy fields, blissfully unaware of the scandals that swirl above them. They'll remember the queen's name, yes, but only as a figure in sermons or gossip. The real story, the whispered rumors of strangled wives, ambitious servants, and hasty marriages, is a tale carried through corridors like the scent of smoke, lingering long after the candles burn out. And so, with Galswintha gone and Brunhilde enraged, the stage is set. Fredegund is queen. But as you curl deeper under your blanket, you sense it: this is not a fairy tale ending. It's only the beginning of a saga soaked in betrayal, ambition, and scandal. The air in Neustria is thick with unease, like the silence before a thunderstorm. You sit in the shadows of the palace corridors, where tapestries dampen the sound but not the tension. Fredegund, now queen, moves through these halls with a grace that's equal parts charm and menace. Her footsteps are soft, her smile even softer, but every courtier knows, if you stand in her way, you might not stand much longer. Rumors start to curl through the stone walls like smoke. Rivals vanish, sometimes suddenly, sometimes after a slow decline that leaves everyone murmuring about poison. Nobody ever sees Fredegund wield a dagger herself, but her name always surfaces in the whispers. To live near her court is to live in a haze of suspicion. Where even the goblet of wine in your hand might feel like a gamble, one of the earliest and clearest casualties of her schemes is Audavra, the discarded first wife of Chilperic. Audavra had already been pushed aside when Fredegund took center stage, but being out of favor wasn't enough. She still lived, and living meant she could still serve as a rallying point for enemies. Conveniently, or suspiciously, she dies around this time, stripped of protection and usefulness. Historians still argue whether Fredegund arranged her death directly, or whether she simply let her rival waste away in isolation. Either way, the message was clear: once you fall from her grace, you fall hard. The quirky tidbit: chroniclers claimed Fredegund once engineered a death by arranging for someone to be accidentally poisoned during a baptismal feast. Imagine sitting there, cradling your newborn in one arm, sipping celebratory wine, and realizing too late the cup is laced. If true, it shows she had no fear of mixing sacraments with slaughter, a detail that horrified priests and entertained gossipmongers alike. Meanwhile, her influence over Chilperic only deepens. He's not just infatuated, he's increasingly dependent. When a noble complains, Fredegund whispers advice. When an enemy challenges the crown, she murmurs counsel late at night. You imagine the king pacing angrily in the hall, ready to lash out, and Fredegund, with calm precision, guiding his hand toward whichever target she chooses. Gregory of Tours, the ever-dramatic chronicler, portrays her as a spider in the web, tugging strings while the king thrashes about. But even Gregory, who despised her, couldn't deny her brilliance at maneuvering. She didn't simply survive at court, she thrived, reshaping it in her image, and yet her ruthlessness brought new enemies. Nobles began whispering to each other about her unchecked power. Some even muttered that her beauty was a form of sorcery, that she had bewitched the king into obedience. In the 6th century, when superstition laced daily life, that kind of talk was dangerous. One step away from being branded a witch, and even a queen might find herself dragged down. Historians still debate whether the stories of her witchcraft were genuine fears or clever slander spread by her rivals. After all, accusing a powerful woman of supernatural tricks was a time-honored way of undermining her. But whether the spells were real or not, the fear they generated worked in her favor. People hesitated to confront her directly, afraid of both her earthly daggers and her supposed unearthly ones. You imagine the candlelit chamber where she sits with Chilperic, her fingers tracing the rim of a goblet as she names another courtier who has wronged them. A servant slips away. The next day, that courtier falls ill, or falls silent. Coincidence? Perhaps. But you notice how often coincidence favors Fredegund. The palace corridors grow quieter as months pass. People lower their voices, afraid that any stray word might reach the queen's ears. You, too, instinctively keep your head down, feeling that chill of being watched, even in silence. Yet, beneath all this menace, you sense something else, a kind of exhilaration. Fredegund is not just surviving, she's rewriting the script for what a queen can be. No passive consort, no decorative presence. She is active, decisive, and terrifyingly effective. To her enemies, she's a menace. To her allies, she's indispensable. The jokes practically write themselves. If Game of Thrones had an HR department, Fredegund would have been fired on day 1. But also promoted to CEO by day 2. That's how contradictory her legend feels, and still, she's only just begun. Because soon, the accusations will grow sharper. Not just poisonings, not just whispers in the dark, but something more scandalous. Something that touches the very heart of family. The kind of scandal that makes even hardened medieval chroniclers raise their quills with disbelief. So you keep following her through these narrowing halls, where the air smells faintly of wax and fear, and where each step she takes seems to echo with the sound of someone else's downfall. The palace torches sputter, throwing long shadows across the carved stone walls. You step lightly, ears pricked, because the whispers tonight aren't about poisonings or banished rivals. They're about something that strikes even closer to home, something that makes courtiers glance nervously toward the royal chambers and mutter behind their hands. Fredegund, they say, isn't content with power alone. She may also be sleeping with her own stepsons. Now, let's pause and remember, rumor in a medieval court is like wine, poured liberally, often sour, but intoxicating enough that people believe it. Historians still argue whether these allegations had any truth at all, or whether they were simply propaganda meant to blacken her name. But the fact that such talk spread at all tells you something about how Fredegund was perceived. She wasn't just feared, she was scandalous enough that the wildest claims stuck. The stepsons in question were the sons of Chilperic by earlier unions, Clovis, Theudebert, and others. Some accounts suggest Fredegund used her allure not only to control the king but also to draw these young men into her orbit. Picture a feast, goblets clinking, roasted meat steaming, and Fredegund leaning just a little too close to a boy who, inconveniently, also happens to be her stepson. Whether or not it happened, the image was enough to fuel gossip for centuries. The quirky tidbit here. In one particularly juicy chronicle, it's claimed that when Clovis rebelled against his father, he might have done so partly because of his entanglement with Fredegund. Imagine family dinners after that, the king glaring at his son, the queen sipping her wine with a faint smile, and everyone pretending not to notice the tension. If medieval courts had reality TV, this would have been the season finale cliffhanger. You wander the corridors and notice how servants lower their eyes when she passes, as if afraid of being caught in the queen's gaze. Maybe they've heard too much. Maybe they've seen too much. Or maybe they know that repeating the wrong rumor could cost them their tongues, or their lives. Still, scandal has a way of clinging to power like ivy to stone. Even if untrue, it painted Fredegund as a woman without boundaries, a queen who blurred lines of morality and family. And in the minds of her enemies, it made her easier to demonize. After all, what's more shocking than a queen who not only kills her rivals but also seduces her husband's children? Yet behind the gossip, there's strategy. If she did weave her influence over the king's sons, it wasn't purely lust. It was politics. By binding them to her, through charm, through intimacy, through whispered promises, she could secure her position, prevent them from turning against her, and maybe even manipulate the succession. A woman without noble blood needed every tool available to stay on the throne, and rumor suggests Fredegund wielded all of them, but of course, strategy doesn't always work out. Theudebert and Clovis, both stepsons, eventually clashed with Chilperic, leading to bloody confrontations. Chroniclers couldn't resist framing these rebellions as fallout from Fredegund's dangerous liaisons, even if politics, greed, and inheritance disputes were the real fuel. Historians still debate whether her role was central or merely embroidered by later storytellers eager to spice up the tale, and here's where the tension sharpens. In a world where women were already mistrusted in power, Fredegund's reputation made her both feared and useful. Enemies painted her as immoral, allies whispered that she was clever enough to use immorality as a weapon. Either way, she remained central, unavoidable, a queen who dominated both the royal bed and the gossip mill. You sit at the edge of her chamber, half shielded by a curtain, and imagine the scene. The queen reclines on a couch, jewels glinting in firelight. A young stepson enters, nervous but drawn in. Is it seduction, or is it intimidation? Is it true, or is it the stuff of rumor mongers scribbling by candlelight centuries later? The truth is hazy, but the legend is vivid, and the legend mattered more than fact. By the time these rumors spread, Fredegund's name was synonymous with scandal. To her enemies, the tales confirmed her as a depraved monster. To her supporters, they were just more proof that she was too powerful to silence. Either way, the story stuck, and centuries later, here you are, still hearing them whispered through history's corridors. So, as you curl deeper under your blanket, remember, in the Merovingian world, rumor was as deadly as any dagger. And for Fredegund, rumor became part of her crown, poisoned jewels, but jewels nonetheless. The years roll forward like armored wagons, heavy and loud, and you find yourself standing between two women who hate each other with the kind of fury that could burn down kingdoms. On one side is Fredegund, Queen of Neustria, sharp-eyed, silk-draped, and endlessly calculating. On the other is Brunhilde, Queen of Austrasia, proud Visigothic princess, sister of the murdered Galswintha. Their rivalry is not just personal, it is dynastic, political, and merciless. You can almost feel the tension stretch across the Frankish lands like a drawn bowstring, ready to snap. It begins with blood. Brunhilde never forgave Fredegund for Galswintha's murder. To her, it wasn't just the loss of a sister. It was the dishonor of her family, an insult to her entire lineage. And because Chilperic, Fredegund's husband, kept Galswintha's rich dowry lands after her death, Brunhilde had a material grievance as well. Family honor plus stolen property. That's a feud carved in stone. You picture letters carried by messengers on tired horses, ink still wet with fury, crossing the borders of Austrasia and Neustria. One queen accusing the other, one king defending his wife. And behind it all, Fredegund smiling faintly, aware that every insult strengthens her position at Chilperic's side. The quirky tidbit here? Chroniclers claimed Brunhilde once compared Fredegund to a tavern maid, sneering that she was too low-born to wear a crown. Imagine the medieval equivalent of a Twitter clapback, but with far higher stakes. Fredegund, of course, responded not with words but with calculated actions. After all, you don't survive the Neustria court by indulging in witty banter, you survive by outlasting and outkilling. Soon, the feud spilled into open war. Chilperic and Brunhilde's husband, King Sigebert of Austrasia, dragged their kingdoms into bloody conflict. The Frankish nobles, never loyal for long, shifted allegiances like gamblers switching tables, each trying to back the side that would win. In 575, the feud hit its peak. Sigebert marched into Chilperic's territory, supported by disgruntled nobles eager to be rid of Neustria's king and his scandalous queen. Chilperic's defeat seemed inevitable. You can almost feel the ground shake as Austrasian armies tramped closer, banners flapping in the cold wind, but then, daggers in the dark. Assassins slipped into Sigebert's camp and killed him. Whispers pointed directly at Fredegund, who had supposedly orchestrated the murder to save her husband. Historians still argue whether she truly sent the assassins or whether Chilperic arranged it himself. But the outcome was clear: with Sigebert dead, Brunhilde was widowed, her plans collapsed. And Fredegund had once again turned disaster into triumph. You imagine Brunhilde's grief twisting into rage. Her husband gone, her sister murdered, and her enemy still reigning smugly in Neustria, it was enough to fuel her for decades. And indeed, their feud didn't end with one assassination. It dragged on for more than 40 years, shaping the politics of an entire generation. At feasts, when courtiers toasted victories, they muttered about the queen's vendetta. In monasteries, monks prayed for peace, their voices echoing against cold stone, yet the conflict raged on. Even peasants in distant villages knew their queen's hatred mattered, because it meant higher taxes, more soldiers tramping through their fields, and less bread on their tables. Fredegund, for her part, thrived in the chaos. Every time Chilperic wavered, she reminded him of the danger posed by Brunhilde, stoking his paranoia until his loyalty to her grew deeper. Their marriage was less romance than alliance of survival. She defended his throne, he secured her crown. You sit beside a smoky hearth, hearing the latest gossip. Brunhilde is plotting with nobles again, Fredegund has sent bribes to bishops, Chilperic is preparing for war. It's exhausting, this endless game of strike and counterstrike, but for these queens, it's life itself. Historians still debate who came out stronger in this rivalry. Brunhilde ruled longer, guiding her descendants and shaping Austrasia's policies. Fredegund, however, secured her son's succession, ensuring the Merovingian line continued. Both women proved that queens could wield power every bit as ruthlessly as kings. As you pull the blanket tighter around your shoulders, the firelight flickers like the clash of swords. You can almost hear the voices of two queens hurling insults across the decades, their feud immortalized not just in chronicles but in the very shape of Frankish history. Neither would forgive, neither would forget, and both would ensure their names lived on, carved in the uneasy stone of legend. The rivalry between Fredegund and Brunhilde doesn't just seethe in the shadows, it erupts into the brutal, everyday reality of court politics. You wander into the echoing halls of Chilperic's palace, where torchlight flickers against polished stone and every corner hides a secret. Here, alliances are made not with warm handshakes but with whispered promises, and broken with poisoned cups or a blade slipped between ribs. You feel the tension the way you feel a storm before it breaks, pressure in the air, the scent of something sharp and dangerous. Fredegund knows the palace is not her sanctuary, it's her battlefield. She has to fight every day to hold her ground. At court, nobles side-eye her because of her low-born origins. Bishops frown because she's far too meddlesome in church affairs, and other women, ladies with impeccable pedigrees, roll their eyes, convinced she has no right to wear a crown. Yet Fredegund turns slights into fuel. When someone doubts her, she finds their weakness and exploits it. When someone laughs, she arranges for them to fall mysteriously ill. You could almost say her idea of networking involves daggers more than polite conversation. One mainstream fact here: the Frankish court wasn't a single, unified institution, it was a shifting assembly of nobles, bishops, and warriors, each jockeying for influence. Kings needed their support to raise armies or collect taxes, which meant the queen consort, if clever enough, could sway them. And Fredegund was very clever indeed. She spread favors like breadcrumbs, making sure no one ever felt entirely safe betraying her, but there's a quirky little tidbit too. Chroniclers wrote that she sometimes gave extravagant gifts to the church not just for piety but to outshine her rivals. Imagine slipping a golden chalice into the offertory plate just to make sure the bishop talks about you during Massachusetts' medieval power politics mixed with Sunday service, because why not? The palace itself becomes a stage for her performance. You walk past banquet tables groaning with roasted boar and spiced wine, and every goblet feels suspect. You glance at the dancers twirling in torchlight, but your eyes keep drifting back to Fredegund at the high table, her smile faint, her gaze cold. She knows who whispers about her. She knows who envies her. And she's already drawing up a list. Her position is never entirely secure. Chilperic's wandering concubines drift in and out of his chambers, each one a potential rival. But Fredegund does not waste time sulking. Instead, she works to eliminate threats, sometimes through persuasion, sometimes through accidents. Historians still argue whether the suspicious disappearances of certain women at Chilperic's court were her handiwork. Let's just say she was very committed to maintaining her status as queen. You picture her orchestrating alliances like a spider at the center of her web. A noble family grows too bold. She arranges a marriage that ties them closer to the crown. A bishop criticizes her influence. She funds a new monastery and turns him into an ally. Yet beneath the surface generosity, everyone senses the sting waiting if they cross her. The rivalry with Brunhilde continues to shape these palace maneuvers. Every policy, every whispered plot, seems to have that ghostly Austrasian queen looming in the background. When Chilperic rides out to battle, Fredegund ensures she has spies watching his commanders. When messengers arrive from other courts, she quizzes them, hungry for information. Knowledge is her real weapon, sharper than any sword. At night, you imagine her walking the dim corridors, oil lamps flickering against carved pillars. Behind her, servants shuffle nervously, aware that one wrong word might end their careers, or their lives. She pauses at the chapel, fingers brushing a wooden crucifix, but you wonder, is it prayer or performance? In this court, it's impossible to tell, there's even a whiff of dark comedy. Chroniclers note that sometimes Fredegund would pretend to act the helpless wife, only to later reveal she had been pulling the strings all along. Like a medieval version of Oh, Who Me? Before casually announcing the downfall of her enemy. Court gossip probably sounded like a mix of soap opera and true crime podcast. Did you hear? The steward who complained about the queen just tripped and fell into the Seine. Strange, isn't it? Historians still debate how much real power she wielded versus how much was fear-based illusion. Some argue she was essentially co-ruler with Chilperic, others say her influence was sporadic, flaring up only when circumstances favored her. The truth probably lies somewhere in between, but what's undeniable is that her presence dominated Neustria's court. You sit back against the cold stone wall, listening to the murmur of voices echoing down the hallway. A servant hurries past, carrying a jug of wine, casting a wary glance over his shoulder. You realize he's terrified, not of the king, but of the queen. That's Fredegund's real achievement. She doesn't just command power. She embodies it, turning every chamber in the palace into an extension of her will, and so the court of Neustria becomes a theater of survival, with Fredegund directing the play. The nobles pretend to flatter, the bishops pretend to scold, and the servants pretend not to know. But beneath the surface, the truth is plain: this is her palace, her kingdom, her story, and everyone else is just an actor hoping not to be written out. The palace of Neustria hums like a hive, and Fredegund is its queen bee, but not all buzzing is friendly. Beneath the glittering banquets and careful diplomacy, there's always the whisper of rebellion, the uneasy shuffle of nobles sharpening daggers out of sight. You walk those drafty corridors, torchlight flickering against walls hung with tapestries of hunts and battles, and you can almost feel the paranoia seep from the stone. In this world, a single rumor can topple a dynasty faster than an invading army. Fredegund knows this better than anyone. Her power depends not just on charm or intimidation, but on eliminating threats, sometimes literally. She cultivates loyalty the way gardeners cultivate roses, pruning ruthlessly. Thorns and all. It's not just enemies outside the palace she fears, betrayal can come from the closest companions. You imagine her watching her attendants pour wine, her eyes sharp as if measuring whether the liquid inside is meant for refreshment, or murder. Here's the mainstream fact: political assassination was practically a career path in Merovingian courts. Kings and queens rarely died peacefully in bed. Poisonings, ambushes, hunting accidents, all of it was fair game in the chess match of Frankish politics. And Fredegund excelled in that brutal tradition. One quirky tidbit chroniclers slipped in: she supposedly kept a chest of poisons, ready for use as the situation demanded. Picture a medieval apothecary's cabinet, but instead of herbs for headaches, little vials labeled for uppity noblemen or just in case husband gets ideas. Of course, whether this chest ever really existed is uncertain, but it's the kind of detail you almost want to believe. Chilperic himself became increasingly dependent on her cunning. He could bluster, he could lead armies, but he couldn't outthink the labyrinth of plots weaving through his own court. That's where Fredegund came in, smoothing over conflicts when it served her, igniting them when she needed an excuse. Historians still argue whether she was the stabilizing force behind his reign or the chaos that undermined it. The truth? Probably both. You lean into the shadows of a council meeting. The nobles debate taxes, bishops scold about morality, Chilperic pounds his fist on the table, and then Fredegund speaks. Her voice is low, steady, cutting through the din. Every man in the chamber listens. Not because they respect her birth or her piety, but because they know ignoring her could end very badly, but paranoia gnaws at her. She knows too well that fortune can flip overnight. She's seen mistresses fall, seen queens stripped of jewels and sent off to convents. And she's not going to let that happen to her. So she tightens her grip on everything, on Chilperic, on their children, on the household staff. Even the cooks feel her scrutiny, their ladles trembling as they stir thick stews, because one badly timed accident could be mistaken for treason. It's exhausting, this constant vigilance. You can almost hear her pacing at night, slippered feet brushing over cold tiles, the creak of her chair as she sits awake long after everyone else has drifted to sleep. Is she praying? Plotting? Simply listening for footsteps in the dark? You don't know. But you sense she never truly rests, and then, as if the palace politics weren't enough, the outside world keeps intruding. Rival lords test the king's authority. Rebellions simmer in distant territories. Messengers arrive breathless with news of uprisings. And always, somewhere on the horizon, Brunhilde lurks, waiting for a chance to strike back. The line between survival and downfall feels razor-thin. One wrong move, one failed alliance, could topple everything. And Fredegund's greatest fear? That someone inside her own palace will decide to act against her. After all, she had clawed her way up from the servant ranks. If she could do it, why not someone else? A dark little joke sneaks into your thoughts. In Fredegund's world, the true employee of the month is whoever manages not to get killed before payday. The Frankish court makes your own office politics look like kindergarten squabbles over crayons. Historians still debate whether Fredegund was genuinely paranoid or simply realistic in a world where daggers and goblets were deadlier than swords. Either way, her reign turned the palace itself into a fortress, not of walls and towers, but of secrets, suspicions, and unspoken threats. you sit quietly in the corner of a chamber, watching as a servant refills the king's cup. His hands shake slightly, and you can't help wondering, is it fear of spilling the wine, or fear of the queen's gaze burning into his back? The hive buzzes, restless, dangerous, but every bee knows who rules it. And as long as Fredegund draws breath, the stingers will always point outward, unless, of course, one day they turn on her. The feud that began with a murdered sister and stolen dowry doesn't stay confined to whispered insults or court intrigues, it explodes into outright warfare, and you can almost hear the clash of steel across the fields of Gaul. The Frankish kingdoms fracture like a cracked mirror, each shard reflecting the ambitions of kings, nobles, and, of course, queens. And in the center of the chaos stands Fredegund, the low-born maid who refuses to be swept aside. You imagine the banners first, bright cloth flapping above muddy fields, each one stitched with symbols of pride. Austrasia's men march under the authority of Brunhilde and her descendants, Neustria's armies rally under Chilperic and Fredegund. To the average soldier, it's less about queens and more about whether they'll get paid in coin or loot, but still, every skirmish feels like an extension of that personal vendetta between two women who will never forgive each other. Mainstream fact: the Merovingian dynasty often broke into pieces, with brothers dividing land and then immediately fighting to seize it back. It was practically the family hobby. You picture a holiday dinner gone wrong, pass the bread, also I'm invading your territory next spring. That endless cycle of division and reconquest kept the Frankish world unstable, which gave ambitious players like Fredegund opportunities to shine. Quirky tidbit: chroniclers mention that soldiers sometimes carried charms or amulets, believing they could ward off the kind of poison plots that queens like Fredegund were rumored to employ. Imagine heading into battle against armored cavalry and thinking, well, at least this carved bone will keep me safe from a royal conspiracy. Chilperic leads his men into the field, but it's Fredegund who pushes for bold moves. She knows the war isn't just fought with swords, it's fought with alliances. She bribes nobles in Austrasia to switch sides, offers churches new privileges to secure their blessing, and reminds her husband constantly that weakness invites betrayal. Without her constant maneuvering, Neustria might crumble under Brunhilde's relentless campaigns, and yet, war is unpredictable. Victories come with brutal losses, defeats with fleeting escapes. Villages burn, peasants scatter, and the fields lie fallow as armies tramp back and forth. You wander along a deserted road, hearing the distant rumble of hooves, seeing the ash of once sturdy cottages drifting on the breeze. For common folk, it doesn't matter which queen wins, the suffering is the same. Still, the rivalry sharpens both women. Brunhilde proves herself an able ruler in Austrasia, guiding her sons and grandsons through crises. Fredegund, meanwhile, digs deeper into her ruthless toolkit. When Austrasia presses too hard, assassins appear. When disloyal nobles in Neustria waver, they vanish. Historians still argue whether her tactics preserved her realm or merely destabilized it further, but there's no denying she played the game with unmatched ferocity. One campaign stands out. In 581, Austrasian forces surged, threatening to tip the balance. But Fredegund countered not with open battle, but with diplomacy sharpened like a dagger. She secured alliances with Burgundy and other Frankish factions, buying Neustria time to regroup. You picture her in candlelit chambers, leaning over maps, her fingers tracing rivers and borders, while messengers hurry out into the cold night. The war may roar on the battlefield, but its heartbeat is here, in her strategies. And through it all, the personal animosity never fades. Even when treaties are signed, even when peace briefly settles, both queens keep planning for the next strike. It's as if the feud has become larger than life, a force of nature, shaping the destinies of kingdoms. You sit by a campfire at the edge of a battlefield. Smoke curls upward, carrying the smell of charred wood and sweat. Soldiers grumble about rations, polish their spears, mutter prayers. Somewhere in the dark, a rider arrives with orders sealed in wax, orders shaped, by Fredegund's hand. She doesn't just send armies, she sends pieces of herself, her will stretching across the Frankish world like invisible chains. Historians still debate which queen was the better strategist. Brunhilde's reign lasted longer, but she was ultimately dragged down by rebellion. Fredegund died earlier, but managed to secure her son's future. Both proved that queens could command not just households, but kingdoms, with as much cunning as any king. For now, the war continues, echoing like thunder across Gaul. And at the heart of it, you see two women staring each other down across decades and battlefields, their hatred so enduring it becomes almost mythic. You can almost hear them whisper, across time, "Not yet. Not ever. I will not let you win." The war drags on, years folding into each other like heavy, blood-stained blankets. You walk along the muddy roads of Neustria, boots squelching in the rain, and you realize that for Fredegund, this isn't just about survival, it's about legacy. Every decree she signs, every alliance she engineers, every noble she rewards or eliminates is a stitch in the fabric of her lasting power. She's no longer the mistress who clawed her way into the king's bed, she's the architect of a kingdom that trembles at her will. You watch her pacing a dimly lit council chamber, hands clasped behind her back, eyes scanning a map spread across an oak table. Messengers wait silently, knowing that every pause, every glance, might signal the direction of the next strike. She's plotting movements not just on the battlefield, but across courts, monasteries, and noble households. Some say she could play chess on 7 boards at once, each piece moving according to her whispered instructions. Mainstream fact: by the late 580s, Fredegund had established her son Clothar II as heir, securing the Merovingian line against both internal conspiracies and Austrasian threats. This was no small feat in a world where kings could die unexpectedly in battle or from poison, and heirs were often swept aside in favor of stronger factions. Ensuring succession was the ultimate act of power for a queen. A quirky tidbit: chroniclers note that Fredegund sometimes disguised her movements, sending attendants in her stead dressed like her. Imagine a medieval body double, except instead of dodging paparazzi, it's to confuse assassins or mislead rival spies. You can almost laugh at the image of two identically dressed women walking different corridors while chaos unfolds elsewhere. But the stakes are relentless. Brunhilde is still plotting, still rallying support in Austrasia. Every treaty is temporary, every truce, a pause before the next storm. You can almost hear the sighs of exhausted messengers, riding night and day between courts, carrying letters inked with venomous intent. Every word they deliver could tip a kingdom toward victory or ruin. Historians still argue whether Fredegund's constant scheming weakened Neustria or strengthened it. Was she a stabilizing force, reigning in her volatile husband and ruthless nobles? Or was she an agent of chaos, extending wars that drained treasure and lives? The truth likely lies somewhere in between. You slip through the halls to glimpse a scene in the royal chambers. Fredegund speaks softly to Clothar, her son, teaching him lessons in patience, cunning, and survival. She knows the boy must inherit not just the throne, but the skills to maintain it. "Trust no one," she seems to whisper, though the words are silent. The lessons sink deep, shaping the next generation, and yet, there are moments of almost human vulnerability. Chroniclers hint at nights when Fredegund sits alone, watching flickering flames in the hearth, perhaps reflecting on the lives lost in her ascent. She's ruthless, yes, but she is not unfeeling. Survival requires sacrifice, but it also exacts a toll on the one who wields it. Outside, the peasants plod through rain-slicked streets, unaware of the queen's machinations. Soldiers trudge through mud and mire, whispering prayers and grumbling at rations. But inside, in the palace, Fredegund is everywhere, in decisions, in letters, in the very pulse of Neustria. Her influence reaches far beyond the high walls, shaping events that will echo for decades. A dark little joke creeps into your mind: in Fredegund's world, loyalty is less a virtue than a survival tactic, and betrayal is a currency everyone trades. You could almost imagine a noble whispering, "I'll serve the queen faithfully. Until tomorrow." And Fredegund? She would already know, and through all of this, you see the contours of her genius, a queen who survives assassinations, wars, betrayals, and rumors, not merely by brute force, but by intelligence, timing, and a relentless will to dominate. The court is a chessboard, the kingdom a game, and she, the queen who started as a servant, is playing for keeps. The toll of constant vigilance begins to show in subtle ways, and you can almost sense it when you walk the palace halls. Fredegund moves with the same precision as ever, but there's a quiet weight in her shoulders, a tension behind the calm that conceals the immense responsibility of maintaining power in a world that never forgives weakness. Every decision she makes carries the echoes of death and betrayal, and yet, she cannot pause. To pause is to invite disaster. It's during this period that the chronicles note her use of more sophisticated political tools. Not just poison or bribes, but marriage alliances carefully arranged, territories subtly ceded or claimed, bishops subtly pressured, and nobles subtly threatened. She understands that overt violence is only one instrument in a symphony of control. The modern equivalent might be corporate maneuvering, but with swords, arrows, and assassins in place of lawsuits. Historians still debate whether this makes her a brilliant strategist or simply someone who exploited the chaotic Frankish system to her advantage. You watch her directing court affairs, often from behind a thin veil of apparent modesty. A bishop approaches, complaining about taxes imposed on his lands. Fredegund listens with a serene expression, nodding in what looks like empathy. But you know better, behind that smile, she is already calculating the loyalty of that bishop, the influence of his allies, and the next steps if he refuses her guidance. Her subtlety is her greatest weapon. Quirky tidbit: chroniclers mention that she once used a simple feast to test loyalty, serving dishes in a particular order to gauge who noticed, who complained, and who remained silent. In a sense, she transformed dining into intelligence gathering. You can imagine nobles nervously picking at their roast, wondering if the way they chewed could endanger them. Meanwhile, the feud with Brunhilde continues to shape the political landscape. Each queen cultivates alliances across regions, and their reach extends into every corner of Frankish society. Every assassination, every marriage, every maneuver reverberates. The king may have nominal authority, but it's these women, Fredegund and Brunhilde, who pull the strings in ways that determine life or death for anyone in their orbit. The stakes are personal as well as political. Fredegund's son, Clother II, is her insurance against the unpredictable nature of Merovingian succession. She teaches him to watch, to calculate, and to understand the delicate balance of power. Some scholars argue that her influence shaped him into a ruler capable of long-term stability, while others contend she left him with a dangerously cynical worldview. Either way, her imprint on his upbringing is unmistakable. There's an almost theatrical aspect to her reign. You can picture the queen orchestrating public appearances, arranging spectacles that reinforce her authority. Every jewel, every gesture, every word in court is carefully chosen to convey a mixture of power and inevitability. Courtiers whisper about her ruthlessness, but they also marvel at her intelligence. The queen is always several steps ahead, making everyone else react rather than act. Historians still argue about her character. Was she purely ruthless, a tyrant in silk and jewels, or was she a survivor forced to operate in a perilous world? Perhaps both are true. Survival demanded cunning and cruelty, but strategy demanded foresight and intelligence. And Fredegund possessed all these qualities in abundance. You imagine her late at night, standing by the hearth, reviewing messages, plotting her next move, calculating contingencies, and watching for even the slightest hint of betrayal. Every action she takes is a thread in a vast web, a web where every noble, soldier, and priest is a potential pawn, or obstacle. And through it all, she endures, unbowed, maintaining a dominance that many men would envy. But few could sustain. It's a rare combination of ruthlessness, intelligence, and courage that allows Fredegund to not only survive but to thrive in a world stacked against her. And as you lean back against the cool stone walls of the palace, you can almost hear the quiet hum of her influence vibrating through every corridor, every hall, every hidden corner where secrets live. Time stretches, and the pattern of intrigue and tension continues, but now Fredegund's reputation begins to precede her like a storm cloud. Wherever she moves, whispers follow, nobles speculate, servants tremble, and even bishops pause mid-prayer, wondering what new maneuver the queen has orchestrated. You trudge through these corridors, imagining the invisible pressure she exerts on everyone, like a weight that doesn't crush, but bends people's wills to her vision. The king is older now, less decisive, more easily swayed by the queen who has survived every threat thrown at her. Chilperic's own mortality becomes an unspoken concern for Fredegund. Every day he lives is another day she must ensure the succession remains intact. The realm stable, and her enemies contained. Historians still argue whether she ever relaxed, even for a moment, or if she lived in constant calculation, a queen whose mind never ceased to plot. One mainstream fact: Fredegund's power peaks during these years. She successfully maneuvers her son Clotho II into positions of influence, ensuring the continuity of her line and securing her legacy. This was no small feat in an era when premature deaths of kings were common and succession disputes often led to open warfare. The future of the Merovingian dynasty literally rested in her hands. A quirky tidbit: chroniclers claim she sometimes tested the loyalty of her court by feigning ignorance of a plot, then observing how nobles responded. Those who failed the test vanished quietly, ensuring that fear and respect were inseparable in her realm. You can almost picture a courtier nervously clearing his throat, wondering if misreading a glance might cost him everything. Despite her skill, enemies abound. Brunhilde remains a persistent thorn, her Austrasian court seething with resentment and plotting revenge. Discontented nobles in Neustria continue to scheme, and foreign powers watch for weaknesses. The realm is a constant balancing act, each misstep threatening collapse. And yet, Fredegund thrives within this tension, finding opportunity in every crisis, her instincts honed by decades of courtly warfare. You imagine her moving through a banquet hall, quietly observing reactions as wine flows and music plays. Every gesture is measured, every smile strategic. It's exhausting work for anyone, but she turns it into an art form. One misstep, one moment of inattention, could unravel years of careful plotting, but she is relentless, precise, and ruthless in equal measure. Historians still debate the morality of her methods. Was Fredegund a monstrous manipulator, or a pragmatic woman operating in a world that demanded toughness for survival? Some argue that, by modern standards, her actions would be condemned, yet in the volatile, dangerous world of Merovingian politics, they were necessary to secure stability. The ambiguity adds to her legend, leaving a shadow that has fascinated chroniclers for centuries. You picture the queen in her private chambers, candles flickering, letters spread before her, maps and lists of nobles meticulously catalogued. Every plan is cross-checked, every ally's loyalty assessed, every potential threat anticipated. She is a spider at the center of an intricate web, each strand both support and warning. To misstep is to die, to hesitate is to falter, but she hesitates rarely, and falters even less. Her life is a mixture of brilliance and danger, strategy and survival. And though the centuries will label her as a figure of scandal and ruthlessness, in this moment, you can almost sense the brilliance behind the legend, a queen who not only survived the deadly intrigue of her time but reshaped it to ensure her dominion endured. By now, the queen has become a living legend in Neustria, her name spoken in hushed tones in halls, taverns, and monasteries alike. You trudge along the shadowed corridors, sensing how everyone, from high-ranking nobles to timid servants, adjusts their behavior to the invisible gravitational pull of her presence. Fredegund is no longer just a consort or schemer, she is the heartbeat of the kingdom, and anyone who underestimates her does so at their peril. Chilperic's health falters intermittently, and every illness underscores the fragility of the power structures around him. Fredegund acts swiftly to stabilize the court, reinforcing alliances, rewarding loyalists, and neutralizing potential challengers. Mainstream fact: she effectively assumes the de facto role of regent during her husband's periods of incapacity, demonstrating an authority that few women in early medieval Europe ever attained. Her ability to step into the vacuum of power ensures continuity, both for the kingdom and for her son's eventual succession. Quirky tidbit: some chroniclers hint that she used mirrors strategically within the palace, positioning them so courtiers might catch glimpses of her observing them, thereby reinforcing her aura of omnipresence. Imagine walking into a hall and thinking you're alone, only to glimpse the queen's eyes reflecting in polished glass, a psychological chess move before psychological warfare became a term. The feud with Brunhilde continues to provide both danger and opportunity. Each queen's maneuvers ripple across the Frankish world, impacting minor nobles and peasants alike. You can almost hear the distant drums of military campaigns, the clatter of armor, and the murmured warnings to stay loyal. Even when treaties are signed, there's a tension in the air, a reminder that neither queen will relent, that every truce is merely a pause in a lifelong duel. Historians still argue about the scale and effectiveness of Fredegund's strategies. Some assert that she merely reacted to crises as they arose, others contend she proactively shaped events, using foresight, manipulation, and strategic marriages to extend her influence across generations. The truth likely rests somewhere between the two, but either way, her impact on the Merovingian political landscape is undeniable. You picture her quietly moving through the royal bedchambers late at night, reviewing petitions, whispering counsel to loyal attendants, and ensuring that every facet of the court bends to her will. Each candle flicker casts her shadow across the walls, as if the very architecture itself has become part of her subtle dominion. Her personal legacy is inseparable from her political one. Clotho too, the heir she has meticulously prepared, is no longer a child but a figure in training, absorbing lessons in vigilance, strategy, and the ruthlessness required to maintain power. Some scholars speculate that her influence during his upbringing directly contributed to his ability to reunite the Frankish kingdoms later in life. Despite decades of intrigue, fear, and calculated cruelty, there's a sense of enduring brilliance about her methods. Fredegund does not rely on brute force alone. Her intelligence, her foresight, and her willingness to act decisively allow her to navigate one of the most perilous courts in history. You sense that even as her mortal life marches toward its inevitable end, her influence will persist, echoing through alliances, laws, and the very bones of the Neustria court. And as you pause to imagine the palace one last time before night, it is clear, every whispered threat, every polished mirror, every poisoned goblet has been a brushstroke in the portrait of a queen who refused to be powerless. Time moves relentlessly, and now Fredegund's health begins to falter, though her mind remains sharp. You wander through the corridors of her palace, noting the subtle changes: torches burn longer, servants whisper more cautiously, and the air is thick with the unspoken knowledge that the queen who has survived everything may soon face the one opponent no intrigue can outmaneuver: mortality. Yet even here, she remains a strategist, orchestrating her legacy from a chamber lined with maps, letters, and lists that could rival any modern intelligence dossier. Her influence over the kingdom is absolute. Chilperic, weakened by illness and years of tension, increasingly defers to her judgment. Mainstream fact: she effectively controls Neustria, directing military campaigns, managing nobles, and ensuring that her son Clotho too is positioned as a future king. Her ability to maintain authority despite illness underscores the formidable intellect and resilience that have defined her reign. Quirky tidbit: chroniclers remark that she sometimes staged practice crises in her later years, testing the loyalty of her courtiers by sending false messages or staging minor disputes. It's almost as if she treats her own court as a living chessboard, keeping her mind sharp while simultaneously gauging the reliability of those around her. You can picture nobles scurrying about, unsure which rumors are real and which are traps. An exhausting existence, but one she orchestrates with meticulous precision. Brunhilde remains the distant, ever-present threat. Although separated by armies and borders, her shadow looms in Fredegund's thoughts. Each decision is measured against the possibility of Austrasian interference, each alliance weighed for both immediate benefit and long-term protection. Historians still debate how much Fredegund's paranoia influenced her policies versus her genuine strategic acumen. Either way, the results speak for themselves. She remains firmly in control, a queen who has turned fear, loyalty, and cunning into instruments of power. You imagine her sitting quietly by a window, watching the late afternoon sun glint off the rooftops of Neustria's capital. Her eyes, sharp as ever, scan the streets below, noting movements of courtiers, merchants, and messengers. Every glance, every gesture is a measure of her enduring authority. Even as her body weakens, her mind charts the course of kingdoms, ensuring that Clotho too will inherit not chaos, but a carefully preserved throne. Her legacy is not merely political, it is psychological. The fear and respect she commands have become inseparable, a dual force that will outlast her mortal presence. Courtiers remember her lessons: always anticipate, always observe, always act. Failure to do so could mean ruin, but success might mean survival, and perhaps, a small taste of her brilliance. There's a darkly humorous thought: even in her final years, Fredegund ensures that no one relaxes, no one ever feels entirely safe. The queen who survived poison, assassination attempts, and decades of war now tests her court with subtle manipulations, reminding everyone that vigilance is eternal. You can almost hear a noble whisper: "Serve her well, or else." As the candlelight dances on tapestries that have witnessed her entire reign, historians still debate whether Fredegund should be remembered primarily as a villain, a survivor, or a genius of political strategy. Perhaps she is all three. What is undeniable is that she mastered her environment, outwitted enemies, and ensured the continuity of her line. She remains, in history and legend, a figure who refused to be powerless, and whose influence shaped the Merovingian world long after her passing. The end of Fredegund's life approaches quietly, yet it is no less calculated than her decades of rule. You walk through the dimly lit halls of Neustria, sensing the residual energy of a queen whose presence has dominated every chamber, every council, every whispered conversation. Even in her final days, she continues to assert control, ensuring that Clotho too is positioned to inherit not only a throne but a carefully managed web of loyalty, fear, and influence. Her health deteriorates, her reality even she cannot manipulate. Mainstream fact: Fredegund dies in 597, having survived the vast majority of her enemies, the political upheavals, and the treacherous waters of Merovingian court life. It is a remarkable record for any ruler, and especially for a queen navigating a world dominated by men who often underestimated her because of her origins. Her ability to maintain power until death is testament to both her cunning and resilience, yet even in death, the stories are colorful. Quirky tidbit: some chroniclers claim that she requested her coffin be positioned so that she could symbolically watch over the kingdom one final time. Whether literal or metaphorical, it speaks to the intensity with which she viewed authority, never to be relinquished entirely. Even in passing, Brunhilde remains alive, still plotting, still a distant rival. Their feud has spanned decades. A testament to the enduring power of both women and the deeply personal stakes of early medieval politics. Historians still argue whether Fredegund's ruthless tactics were necessary for survival or if they exacerbated the instability of the Frankish kingdoms. Either interpretation emphasizes her centrality in shaping the political landscape of her time. You imagine the court reacting to her death, nobles adjusting their positions, courtiers calculating loyalties, soldiers awaiting new orders. The ripple effects of her life extend beyond her body, into every corner of Neustria, and indeed, all of the Frankish realms. Her influence persists in alliances cemented, enemies neutralized, and a son trained to inherit a throne with a deft understanding of intrigue. Even as her coffin is lowered, one can almost hear the echo of her strategies in the halls, the way she manipulated alliances, monitored threats, and ensured loyalty. She is both legend and cautionary tale, a queen who used intellect, fear, and strategic ruthlessness to survive in a world that offered few safety nets for women of ambition. And you, standing in the silent palace corridors, realize that Fredegund's story is more than scandal, it's an example of political mastery, of survival against staggering odds, and of the enduring influence one determined individual can exert over history. Her reign leaves a blueprint for power, proving that cunning, foresight, and audacity can outlive even the strongest adversaries. The feud with Brunhilde will continue, but Fredegund's legacy is secure. She has left a mark on the Frankish world, on history, and on the imagination of generations to come. Her story whispers through the ages: power is never given, it is claimed, and sometimes, it is held with teeth and fire. Now, you let the echoes of battle, whispered conspiracies, and flickering torches fade from your mind. The palace corridors grow silent, the maps and letters stacked neatly in shadowed chambers, and for a moment, you breathe more freely. The story of Fredegund, of cunning and survival, of rivalry and ruthlessness, lingers gently, but you do not carry its weight. Imagine the candlelight dimming, smoke curling lazily, the cold stone warming beneath your fingertips. Even the most dangerous figures can teach lessons when viewed from a distance, and Fredegund's life reminds you that intelligence, patience, and subtlety are forms of power as potent as swords. You let the images of feasts, mirror games, and whispered plots dissolve into the quiet hum of the night. The echoes of her reign retreat into the walls, leaving only the faint memory of her indomitable presence. Take a deep breath. Feel the slow, deliberate rhythm of your heartbeat as you drift, letting the centuries roll past in soft, muted waves. Imagine the Frankish field stretching endlessly, the kingdoms quiet now, the queen's voices softening to whispers. You are safe here, in the calm after centuries of intrigue. Watching history unfold from a gentle distance, and as you close your eyes, remember this: even the most complex, tumultuous lives, full of plots, rivalries, and danger, can become stories that soothe and fascinate. Let the memory of Fredegund, of her strategies and cunning, settle like a velvet cloak around your mind. Allow the quiet, the soft hum of the night, the imagined flicker of torchlight, to carry you towards sleep.